Hello everybody, welcome to a new episode of the vlog. Today I wanted to talk about one of the greatest events in rock and roll music, of course, in 1965 when Bob Dylan went electric. He was, of course, just a acoustic folk singer-songwriter and probably the most well-known folk singer-songwriter of the early to mid-60s. He was setting the folk world on fire when he decided to sort of shock the entire music industry by putting on a Fender Stratocaster electric guitar and playing with a electric band. Now, the central incident of this moment in time was the Newport Folk Festival of 1965, which took place on July 25th, and that is frequently cited as being just a turning point in the world of music, in the world of rock and roll. But as I go back through history, I start to wonder if that show was the massive surprise that it is alleged to have been. Of course, there's been interviews with many people behind the scenes who organized the festival and many people who were just in the audience attending the festival, and people have gone back and looked at reviews of the shows and such. In any case, it was certainly a big deal. The only reason I wonder if it was a surprise or not is because, of course, Bob Dylan had put out the Bringing It All Back Home album in March of that year. And that was the album, of course, where side A was electric, or at least featured an electric backup band. People literally said he was selling his soul and that he should just stick to folk music. But I mean, some of his fans and critics at least held out hope that this would be a temporary move, just be experimental. When Bob Dylan got back to gigging, he was still performing acoustically. He never performed an electric gig until he performed at Newport, which is, of course, legendary. But in the week prior to his Newport appearance, he released the single for Like a Rolling Stone. Like a Rolling Stone came out July 20th, 1965, famously electric, 6-minute long song, with the B-side actually being Gates of Eden. Gates of Eden, of course, not only came from Bringing It All Back Home, had been previously released, but was part of the acoustic side. So, Like a Rolling Stone was another step towards the electrification of Bob Dylan's sound. So, I wonder if at the Newport Folk Festival 5 days later on July 25th, if there was anyone in the audience who suspected that he might do an electric set. Because even though he'd never done it live, it was clearly the direction he was moving towards. But that being said, I understand why it was a surprise. This is the Newport Folk Festival, after all, not just a festival that is pretty purely in the folk genre at this point, but it's like the premier folk festival in America. Folk purists attend this event, and Bob Dylan is their hero. So I can understand why it would be a bit of a betrayal when on July 25th, well, let me step back a little bit to July 24th, the day before, Bob Dylan plays 3 songs, totally acoustically, at a sort of workshop event the day before the festival, just for artists to get their sets down and do a bit of a practice run through. He does All I Really Want to Do, If You Gotta Go, Go Now, and Love Minus Zero / No Limit. Totally acoustically, like I said. So I wonder if Bob Dylan was just trying to be a little bit spontaneous there, trying to shock people with the live set, so he thought, I better stay acoustically for the sort of dress rehearsal so that nobody would know. I mean, he's totally at risk at being thrown out of the festival entirely, as the board of operators, including Pete Seeger, at this festival, wound up being against his live set when it eventually happened. So either he performed acoustically there to try to mask the fact that he was going to go electric, or it was just a spontaneous decision between that rehearsal performance and the next day. Some people tend to lean towards the impression that it was spontaneous, as it was that day, July 25th, that he sort of got a band together. I'm taking this from Wikipedia. I'm not totally sure if it's 100% confirmed, but apparently Jonathan Taplin, who had been a roadie for the festival, claimed that it says Dylan had been irritated by what he considered condescending remarks which festival organizer Alan Lomax had made about the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. He felt that they were not a valid band for consideration to the festival because they were like an electric blues band, so they were forbidden. And allegedly, Bob said, profanity included, cover your ears, children, well, fuck them. If they think they can keep electricity out of here, I'll do it. And on a whim, he said he wanted to play electric. Of course, all anecdotal. We can never be truly sure what happened. But if that is to be believed, then he made that decision day of to go electric. So yeah, even though he'd released music electrically, he still wasn't 100% sold, allegedly, until that day on the idea of an electric performance. But he got a band together. He actually took a couple of band members from the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. He took Jerome Arnold, and he took Sam Lay, the bassist and drummer. And he got Barry Goldberg to play piano. The set also included Mike Bloomfield playing lead guitar and Al Cooper on organ. He knew those people before. They are two of the band members that performed on the Like a Rolling Stone single. And he had his perfect electric rock band with which to shock the crowd that day. The events of July 25th are legendary. We even have film footage of it, which blows my mind. And he opens his famous electric set with the song Maggie's Farm. Then he went through Like a Rolling Stone, and then Phantom Engineer. Now what Phantom Engineer is just an early version of It Takes a Lot to Laugh, It Takes a Train to Cry. So it was a very brief set, filled with many cheers and many boos. I've heard lots of arguments about this over the years as to, some people say that the crowd was mostly booing. That's the legend, was that he got booed off stage. But then there's others who say, oh no, it was mostly cheering. There was just a few annoyed people booing. The true story of how the audience was feeling is hard to know, but it was definitely a mixed response for sure. You had people thrilled with his new direction, and people who thought that again, he was a sellout, or he didn't care about the music anymore. That's what a lot of people said. A lot of people said, oh, he's all doped up, he's all stoned, and he's trying to be like his new rock and roll friends, he's going Hollywood. But in the end, of course, we know now that the music he would release during his electric period, and I'm just talking about the brief period between 1965 and 67, would become some of the most critically acclaimed and best-selling works of his entire career. So pretty universally considered a good decision now, but it would have been shocking there. He did leave the stage after doing It Takes a Lot to Laugh, Takes a Train to Cry, or Phantom Engineer, I guess, as it was called then. And then the presenter, Peter Yarrow, had to basically convince Bob Dylan to return to the stage. He apparently was liking the set. Bob was kind of annoyed, not just with the semi-negative crowd response, but with the whole atmosphere around the folk community at the time, and not allowing electric acts to play. So again, he was kind of, if it is to be believed that he put the band together spontaneously that day, then it was kind of a protest move to the festival organizers for being upset about the electric performance. But Bob Dylan did come back out after some pressuring from Peter Yarrow, and he came back up with an acoustic guitar and no harmonica. He had to get a harmonica from the audience. The audience was was very quickly rather, willing to give him one. He had the wrong harmonica. He asked for an E harmonica, and apparently the audience members were throwing a whole bunch of harmonicas on stage, being like, oh, Bob Dylan might play my harmonica. He did. He played some acoustic songs, which apparently seems to have won the crowd over. So any legends or stories that this concert became a riot due to the blasphemous rock and roll music is not really true. There were some boos for sure, but there were some very happy audience members as well. He does Mr. Tambourine Man and It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, and then says goodbye to the Newport Folk Festival, not just for that year, but for several years. He was an annual performer there. He played famously at the 63 and 64 festival, legendary sets there as well. But yeah, this was his last set there, because I guess he was a little bit annoyed with the festival, and festival organizers were annoyed with him as well, particularly, legendarily, Pete Seeger. Again, this is one of those things that is deeply entrenched in the world of mystery for exactly how annoyed Pete Seeger was about it. Pete Seeger, of course, the legendary... I don't need to explain who Pete Seeger is, probably, to people watching this video. One of the most legendary folk musicians of all time, member of the Weavers, etc. He's quoted to have said, "Get this distortion out of his voice, it's terrible. If I had an axe, I'd chop the microphone cable right now." I've heard rumors that he had an axe and was about to chop the cable and was, like, restrained by someone to not do it. Other remarks just say that he was kind of annoyed but willing to live with it. He in later years would say that the only reason he wanted him not to play electrically, or that he had no problem with him playing with an electric band, but that he felt it was too distorted and nobody could hear his lyrics. Hard to say. In any case, I do kind of understand why it would be difficult for his fan base, for the organizers of that festival, and for critics to come to terms with what he was trying to do. I think that the folk movement at that time kind of stood aside from what the rock and roll movement was at the time, and I'm talking about like the British invasion of the time with the Beatles, the Stones, and by this point the Who, and they were kind of happy to stand separate from that. But Bob Dylan going electric with Bringing It All Back Home, with Highway 61, and with his Newport Folk Festival performance and more performances that would come after that, really ushered in a new wave of a blending of the two genres into the folk rock movement of the late 60s. And then, of course, the Byrds recording their electric version of Bob Dylan's song Mr. Tambourine Man played no small role in that as well. The Byrds, of course, became massive successes. And, yeah, folk rock was the hot genre of, like, 1965 to 67, culminating in, like, the Summer of Love around then. And, yeah, Bob Dylan was the start to all of that, and that Newport performance, which the first of many for Bob Dylan. He then performed in New York City the following month on August 28th, 1965 at Forest Hills Stadium. And by this time, there are fans showing up to the venue pretty much knowing he's going to play electrically and ready to boo. That's the fascinating thing about his tours in 1965 and 66. There's so many famous concerts, particularly on his world tour, particularly his Manchester concert where he gets heckled and called Judas. But that's the interesting thing, and Bob Dylan had a hard time coming to terms with this as well. That there were people who would pay the entrance ticket price. Granted, ticket prices were nothing like what they are today back then, but still, people would pay to come in. They would take their entire evenings just to kind of show up and protest. Just to show up and boo at the stage. Now, again, at all of these concerts, these albums that he made, the electric albums, sold extremely well. He had many fans that were stoked about his moving to electric music. But he also, of course, had those purists who felt he was doing the wrong thing, who would, come to his shows night after night. He always had a group of people in the audience booing him on that world tour. And it did kind of annoy him, and I get why. Like, you know what you signed up for. I'm a firm believer nowadays, because I've been to some concerts, including a couple of Bob Dylan concerts, by the way, where I've read some reviews afterwards and people were kind of like, Bob doesn't care about the words anymore, he just mumbles and he stands on stage and he collects his money. And I'm a firm believer in researching the concerts you're going to see before they happen. There's no point to going to a concert you know you're not going to enjoy. And I, just for the record, I loved it. I love the new arrangements of Bob Dylan songs. I've talked about them on this channel before. I continue to follow Bob to this day, and his many weaving and winding changes to his musical style and his career, and I think he's amazing, of course. These people, too, I'm not saying that they were uneducated with what the show was going to be. They knew it was going to be electric. They showed up to protest. I don't understand that. But in retrospect, I think there's a lot of us that wish we could go back in time and take in one of his shows from that period. His electric period ends shortly thereafter. I mean, he makes the John Wesley Harding album in 1967, which I almost think is sort of transitional. It has elements from his electric period, and it has elements of what would become his brief country music period after that, and he went full-blown into the country scene then after that with Nashville Skyline, and like I said, through the years, the amount of changes in the genres that he's playing, and the amount he's able to adapt throughout his career is amazing. And Bob Dylan just does what he wants, and that's what we all love him for. That's going to do it for this video. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Bob Dylan Goes Electric controversy. It's not a controversy anymore, but I suppose it certainly was at the time. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know in the comments anything I've left out, any information I may have gotten wrong. Feel free to let me know. I on this channel do rock and roll history related videos every Friday. I also go and visit historical sites on the first and third Wednesdays of each month. And thank you so much for watching. Check out the description for links to where you can find my own music, where it's sold or streamed online, as well as a list of all my upcoming concert dates, with more to be announced. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys again real soon.